Chris Jones. I'm Head of Health and Wellness Strategy for Network Rail. I oversee the medical, occupational health and wellbeing services, and I'm developing the strategy for the next 2 control periods. We've got multiple health risks. We obviously have lots of people using tools that have vibrations, that have noise. We have people who may be going out and becoming exposed to asbestos or lead potentially. And then we also have health opportunities, which are we recognise that people aren't necessarily as active as they could be, that there are higher levels of stress than are necessary for good performance, and that people's diets, their recovery, their sleep, again, all have areas of development. So I think it's we tend to look at it as opportunities rather than risks in those areas. So different people are affected to different risks in our organisation. We have lots of frontline workers. They're the people who do hard jobs day in, day out, where they might be exposed to, again, tools that vibrate or lots of noise or potentially dust and silica and other respiratory issues. So from a risk and a hazard perspective, we've got many thousands of those people. But then from a more general lifestyle perspective, in terms of their physical well-being, their mental well-being, that affects virtually everyone. So most people have areas of improvement. Stress itself often tends to be more of an issue for middle management than it does the most senior people, which is often the assumption, but actually it tends to be those people in the middle who maybe get pressure from the top and pressure from the bottom, and they tend to be a bottleneck. So some of them, like hand-arm vibration syndrome, which is caused if someone has excessive exposure to vibrations, well, that can cause the loss of the use of the fingers, the hands, pain, disability for the rest of their life. We obviously have the risk that people might be exposed to asbestos or asbestosis, mesothelioma and respiratory diseases. We're going to have people who become deaf if the level of noise they're exposed to just aren't controlled. At the same time, the lifestyle factors, we know that the people who are sedentary have a much higher risk of heart disease, of cancer, of diabetes. Stress is a risk factor for, again, cardiovascular disease, but it also affects the foods I want to eat, the activity I'm willing to do. So actually, again, the risks from these are quite significant. So one of the key things I think the industry as a whole need to improve their understanding of, but also make sure people understand the benefits of, and that's how well people take part in health surveillance. So health surveillance are tools or services that are used to help to identify whether someone might be being harmed from the work they do. So if we take hand-arm vibration syndrome, it could be a health questionnaire that gets sent out once a year asking if they have any tingling or numbness in their fingers. And again, taking part in health surveillance is really important for people because, again, the earlier we can identify problems, the earlier we're able to help modify the work that they do to keep them in their job. And actually, if people don't go through health surveillance, if they shy away from it because they're potentially nervous, then it makes it actually more likely that they'll get to a stage where less can be done for them and less support can be offered. So actually really taking part in health surveillance measures which organisations fund for them, it is really important for the individual because it's our way of helping to keep them in their job day in, day out. The issue is that people don't necessarily see the immediate benefits of filling out another questionnaire or going for an assessment, or they might feel nervous about, well, what happens if the result comes back and it's not great. But again, the reality is that these services are put in place to protect the health of our people. They are there to make sure that any issues that are creeping up, we can absolutely support them. We can make sure that they get seen by a health professional to give them some advice. And so actually helping these people to take part is fundamentally what my role is there to support. But at the same time, there is a responsibility for each individual person to take part in it as well. So we do this for their benefit, but again, there is a personal responsibility that every one of us has for our own health and well-being. And health surveillance is a core part of what we need to do as an industry. In terms of general physical well-being, there are huge amounts that we do on a day-to-day basis, and I think it's important that every one of us recognises that my health and well-being, your health and well-being, everyone's health and well-being is about what we decide to do. So we are responsible for that, and our organisations can support us, and they might be able to make it easier for us to do certain things, but we ultimately decide what happens. Exercise is really important. It's important for organisations and it's important for individuals. When it comes to individuals, exercise is undoubtedly one of the most important factors that they can control to reduce the risk of not only diseases such as heart disease, which you know about, and diabetes, but also cancer exercise is one of the best ways to prevent and also support the treatment of cancer. But exercise also helps with depression, it helps with weight loss, it helps with mood. From an organisational perspective, exercise is probably the most important risk factor, and there's evidence that says that exercise for an organisation is more important than smoking, diabetes and obesity put together. And that's because exercise or low exercise levels affects more people than all three of those other issues put together. So actually, when we talk about a workforce as a whole, if you were to get everyone more active, that would have more of an impact than if you were to get rid of obesity, smoking and diabetes in the workforce combined. So exercise is the most important factor an organisation can control. So we spent time talking about occupational health surveillance. Now, that is in itself a process by which we've identified potential health hazards through work that people do, and we put in place systems to try to identify if issues are being caused by it. Separate to that, we also did a wellbeing at work survey. It was a trial survey to understand how well it worked in Network Rail, and we did that in two parts of the business. We had about 2,600 people respond to it, so it was a fairly good uptake level. And really, what we were trying to do there is move the agenda of wellbeing away from the surface level indicators, so how much exercise do I do, or does the average person do? What is the average person's diet like? Do they feel stressed? To actually understanding what's happening in the organisation that's then leading to the potential problems around work stress or poor lifestyle choices. So we looked at and we used a model that incorporated the HSE management standards. So we looked to understand what is the workload issue on those people, what is the amount of control and what say do they have in how they do their job, what are the relationships like that they have at work, do they have role clarity or is their role clashing with someone else's? And those are what we would call the primary drivers of well-being, because ultimately what they're doing is trying to understand what the organisation needs to change to get to better well-being, rather than simply focusing on how can the individual change. So can I do more exercise, moving away from purely that to how can we change to make it easier for people to live healthier lifestyles. The good thing about the HSE management standards is that they are easy for everyone to understand. There's different tools that you can use. They all ask the questions in slightly different ways. But ultimately, if you can understand that someone can have too much or not enough work on them or demand on them, and that can cause them to feel stressed or pressured. Someone can have not enough say in what they do. You might find that they are not communicated with in the right way. It's a very simple checklist that you can work down to start to have conversations with people that are saying, what is influencing your well-being, and can I, as a line manager, have a conversation with you? And that conversation might be as simple as, can I understand how you are finding your role and how does that fit in with the rest of the team? Because one of the challenges we know in the HSE management standards is actually you might not have role clarity. You might have what we call role ambiguity, where you believe you're doing a task, someone else believes they're doing the same task, and you just end up conflicting with each other. So as a manager, part of the role is, without any fancy tools, to sit down and understand, is that right for you? How is it working? How can I help you to get better role clarity? In our survey, and we're still analysing the results in detail, but at a high level what we saw was that actually the work demands on our people across the board didn't come out as a concerning finding for them. One of the things we did hear about loud and clear was actually in some parts of the business, people didn't feel that they had enough say in what they did. When you think that we've got people with 10, 20, 30 years experience, some of them actually felt that they could add value by having more say in what they do. So that was a really interesting area for us. And again, we're now talking to the various parts of the business where this trial happened to understand, well, how could that look moving forwards? So the benefit of doing this survey was, for us, it started to point us in the direction of understanding what in the organisation was actually causing the issues. Now, as with all surveys, they're very good at telling you what the issue is. They don't tell you why the issue is there. So they don't actually come up with what we call the qualitative issues. So one of the things we did is actually we did solution groups afterwards where we got pockets of people who'd completed the survey together, away from any Network Rail employees, so we were supported by another organisation, and we actually just asked them, well, why was this an issue? You were telling us that you don't have enough say. What would your ideal amount of say look like? And that really helped us to drive then and understand what the issues were that were leading to a point where people didn't have enough say in what they did. I think one of the things that came out loud and clear was there was a huge amount of commitment from our people to our organisation, and that came out loud and clear. So that was a really positive finding. And it really does come back to the point that people want to feel like they have a sense of purpose in what they do, that their role plays a part in the bigger picture. And again, that's something that we heard loud and clear, is people saying, I want to understand what part I'm playing in the success of the organisation. And one of the things we can now do is start to message that better in different ways. And again, we're now starting to talk to people in the business to understand how that can be. Now, the reality is that those issues may change from year to year. So, you know, this is a flavour of understanding. And if we went and asked more people, we'd probably identify other issues. But it was more the approach we took was to say there's got to be something deeper than simply understanding whether someone has a good diet or whether they get enough sleep, to understand whether someone is struggling from work-related pressure or not. And this was our first venture into really looking into that area. We identified that 35% of people said they exercised frequently. And what was really interesting is that those people who said, I exercise frequently, reported their performance as being 3% greater than those people who said, I exercise infrequently or only occasionally. Now that's important, because one of the hardest things for health professionals to do, people like myself, is to build a business case for health, where people actually say, well, what is the benefit of me paying for this service? Well, actually, if I can improve everyone's performance by 3% through making them exercise or helping them to exercise, then that is millions of pounds in better performance each year. So that was a really interesting finding as well. The reality is, at Network Rail, we have a way to go before we get here. Our compliance rates, we've done a recent review, our compliance rates for occupational health surveillance are far lower than they should be. I think it's important that we start to message the importance of this so that people understand we're not doing this just for the sake of it. We're not doing it as a tick box exercise. We're doing this because we genuinely care about the health and well-being of our people. And what we're trying to do is provide services that make sure that they are protected and that their health is, again, maintained at a good level throughout. The obvious reason for that is our people have huge amounts of experience. They are very good at what they do. We want to put in place initiatives that keep them in their jobs for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And a core part of that is making sure they have access to health surveillance and that they take part in it. So it's about us getting people to understand what the benefits are. And the benefits are there for us as an organisation. We have more skilled people in their jobs for longer, which is exactly what we want. But there are benefits for our people. They're in their jobs for longer, and they're in their jobs without any health problems.
Chris Jones from Network Rail talked about the need for increasing participation in health surveillance. This is very important. It is also a legal requirement for certain exposures. Exposures to lead, exposures to loud noises, exposure to hand-arm vibration associated with the use of various hand power tools. Without health surveillance, we're not able to establish whether the arrangements are working within a company to prevent ill health. So it's very important that people participate in the health surveillance regimes.